McCuistion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
In August of 2019, 181 CEOs of America's largest companies issued a statement that they were changing the primary purpose of their corporations from a sole emphasis on increasing shareholder value to the purpose of serving all stakeholders. Specifically, they promised these things. Number one, deliver value to our customers. Number two, invest in our employees. Number three, deal fairly and ethically with our suppliers. Number four, support the communities in which we work. And finally, generate long-term value for shareholders. Now, on this program, we'll examine these purposes, whether they're new, why the CEOs made this statement, and most importantly, whether these promises can be kept. And to help me do so are two guests and my co-host, Jim Falk. So Jim, welcome back. The CEO and the President of World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth.
It's always good to be with you, and also nice to be with my friend over here who you're about to introduce.
You know Keith Cargill, without a doubt, and Keith Cargill is founder, president, and CEO of Texas Capital Bank, and following college and a stint at, let's just say, Arthur Andersen, he's been a career banker. And joining us via a satellite is Raj Sisodia. Now, Raj Sisodia is the Olin Distinguished Professor of Global Business at Babson College. He's the Whole Foods Market Research Scholar in Conscious Capitalism and the co-author of this book, which is called Conscious Capitalism. Raj, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Dennis. Great to be back.
Good. We'll come back to you in just a minute. But first, Keith, let me just start with you. I mean, you saw those statements that I put up there. You read the thing. And how does that resonate with you?
I believe it's on target, Dennis. I believe while it will be challenging for these CEOs with companies as large as they lead to accomplish these things quickly, I believe they have the right intellectual buy-in and commitment over time to try and move their culture in this direction.
Okay, what would it be? I mean, I happen to have known, you're one of the 7 founders of Texas Capital Bank. I happen to know most of the others and have great respect for all of them and what you guys have done. But when you were looking to found that bank, what did you guys talk about? Values? Did you talk about stakeholders? And what exactly did you talk about then?
We did talk about these things, and we had a consensus that to really be able to compete against the large companies in our industry and to be effective and be able to serve the clients in a way that we thought would be necessary to win the best clients, very important if you're a bank, that we needed a culture that really was one of respect, collaboration, engagement, passion about what we were able to do for our clients and for each other. And by doing that, we had an opportunity to extend that sense of partnership and building something significant and special in our communities with our not-for-profit partners and also with our other stakeholders, strategic partners or advisors. So that sense of partnership, Dennis, is really what drove us to this sense of purpose, bigger than only profit. But I want to emphasize, at Texas Capital Bank, we get it. Profit is what fuels the ability to do all these things.
Now, you've got to finance it. You've got to have some way to finance this thing. Peter Drucker said, I think, and I may be paraphrasing, years ago, there's no such thing as profit. But what he really meant is that we've got to take care of our employees and all these other stakeholders. And we've got this idea of, let's just say we wouldn't have any capital if we didn't take care of that group as well. So it's a cost of capital, so to speak.
What do you think, if I may, what do you think pushed the Business Roundtable to take this action now?
Jim, I believe part of what's moving corporations, leaders of corporations to think this way about purpose is the fact that if you're going to win for the next 20 years, it's all about, are you attracting the right talent And is that talent going to be engaged and have a sense of significance in what they do when they wake up in the morning and come to your company? And millennials and Zs, they do want a company where they're doing something more significant to make lives better. And if you can tie that to the importance of making lives better for all stakeholders, clients, not-for-profit organizations you engage with, one another as colleagues, you have something that you do wake up and get excited about each day. I can tell you, I still feel that way after 20 years. I can't wait to go do what we have a chance to do each day.
Well, you and I and Jim are not exactly millennials at this point, to say the least, however. Now, Raj, they started that bank 20 years ago. What are your total assets now?
Just over 30 billion.
30 billion. They started and they had one of the largest capital raises at the time. Now, before you guys wrote Conscious Capitalism, but Raj, before you sort of teamed up with John Mackey, I think you had done some work in the corporations that had a different kind of culture, and you looked at their performance as well. Give us some background on how you got into Conscious Capitalism.
Yes, Adam. So I wrote a book called Firms of Endearment, How World-Class Companies Profit from Passion and Purpose. And that book came out in 2007. And in that, I was looking at companies that were loved by their customers, by their employees, welcomed by their communities, had long-term stable partnerships with their suppliers and so forth. And I was looking at what made that happen, what made these companies loved by everybody. And we found what we now call the principles or pillars of conscious capitalism. First of all, that they did have a purpose that went beyond profit, that they were trying to do something meaningful, that's something that was worth doing in the world. And that's why they were organized as a business. So Whole Foods' purpose was to educate people that what you put into your body makes a difference to your health and to the health of the food system and the health of the planet. And that's what drives them. That's what attracts employees to work for them. That's what brings customers through to their door. And that's what the investors who put money into the company really cared about. So that purpose became sort of a rallying point for all stakeholders to actually be on the same side of the table. They're not adversaries sort of competing for a limited pool of value, but basically they're all in this together to bring about this change in the world and be participants in that. So the idea of purpose, the idea of creating value for all of your stakeholders consciously, not just using them to maximize profits, but actually consciously seeking to serve them and give them, for employees, for example, meaningful work, the ability to look after their families, for customers, focusing on their health and well-being and quality of life, not just on selling them as much as possible, making sure your suppliers are viable and profitable and don't squeeze them, investing in communities, investing in the environment, and even paying taxes. We found that set of 34 companies in that book, or 28 companies actually, 18 public and 12 private, did all these things, and we found that the financial performance, which surprised us when we looked at it after the fact, we picked them based upon these criteria, and we found that these companies had actually outperformed the S&P 500 by a 9-to-1 ratio over a 10-year period, even as they were paying their employees well, giving good benefits, investing in customer care, and doing all the other things, right? So it illustrated very clearly that business is not a zero-sum game, that when you align all these energies together, you actually release extraordinary value creation potential. And that's what businesses are to be, right? There's one way of doing business, which is simply that we squeeze our employees and we squeeze our suppliers and we charge as much as we can to our customers, and we do all of that, and that's how we maximize our profits, by maximizing revenue and minimizing cost. But that's really not worth anything. That's not a business value. That's a business extracting value. It's kind of a parasite business. True businesses create tremendous value by harnessing all these energies together, coalescing around a shared purpose and having shared values. And you see the outcomes are extraordinary.
Okay, now, Raj, you are not old enough, obviously, to have read this statement when it came out, but I am. In 1970, one of our favorite economists, Milton Freidman, wrote an article for the New York Times, and I've got part of the quote of what he wrote there. So let's look at that, and I'm going to read it for the viewer and for you, Raj, but we can see it here in the studio. He says, but the doctrine of, quote, social responsibility, end quote, taken seriously would extend the scope of the political mechanism to every human activity. In such a society, quote, there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. Now, Raj, you're very familiar with that statement. It's in the book, and I'm using your book in my class that I'm teaching this semester, by the way. And your co-author, John Mackey, who I've met and interviewed as well, John actually debated Milton Freidman in 2005 in Reason magazine. I'm going to leave T.J. Rogers out of it. That just screws up the conversation here. But give us some idea about what Milton Freidman said and what John Mackey said in response to each other and these different opinions about the purpose of a corporation.
Right. So I think Milton Freidman basically was saying that you only do what you have to do legally, and you focus on the singular outcome. And I think economists in general have tended to reduce business to a kind of a math problem, that there only needs to be one outcome that we focus on, because that gives managers something that they can manage towards. The fact is, business is a multifaceted, multidimensional activity. We don't just create wealth, we create many kinds of impacts. You could say we create or potentially destroy at least 8 kinds of wealth. There's a financial capital, intellectual capital, social capital, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, ecological well-being, the impact on the culture, and the impact on our bodies. These are all the consequences of how we operate. And we can't have laws and rules on all of them, right? So, but if a business is not conscious of the impacts it's having in all those other areas, and singularly focus on that one outcome, which is one kind of value for one stakeholder, right? The profits for shareholders. But what about the quality of life and the longevity and the impact on the families of employees? What about the actual health and well-being of customers, right, etc.? What about the environment? What about our communities? All of those things matter. Economists act like money is the only game in town. There are other games in town, and those do matter. And businesses that manage for all of those simultaneously, that recognize that this is an interconnected and interdependent system, all the stakeholders. I use the acronym SPICE to represent them: society, partners, investors, customers, employees, and the environment, right? We need to simultaneously look to optimize value creation for all of them rather than maximize one piece of it. In any interconnected system, like it's my body, if I just say I'm going to maximize my right arm, right? What am I going to do to the health of the whole thing? It's not going to be viable in the long term. So I think his was a narrow view. Economists don't run great companies, right? They've tried to reduce them with mathematically represent them in a simple way. And mathematical models are much more easy and elegant when you have a singular objective function. So that we kind of made business into a math problem, and it's not. It's a multifaceted human activity. So John, I think, argued in that article that, listen, all of these things are connected. I know that if my employees are happy and well looked after, and they have a sense of purpose around health and food, that in fact my customers will have a great experience. And I know that if my customers are happy, they're going to come back. They'll be, that all of these things are going to feed each other, right? Ultimately, and that's going to make a difference.
In the case of Whole Foods, literally, Raj, let me interrupt you there. I think you're exactly right, Jim.
Yeah, I think that may be the case in many instances, but it's also true, Keith, that shareholders, when they're making a decision whether or not to invest in your bank or other companies, it's a risk reward. They want to be sure that they're doing it for a way to build their pension, build net worth.
Well, absolutely. And while I fundamentally agree with most of what Raj just shared, I don't believe that Milton Freidman was that far off from where the new statement comes from. He didn't elaborate on some of the things he alluded to, the dedication of resources well, so you generate profit. Because I do believe all the things we do in this effort to be good partners in helping all our constituents is how we invest our resources. And by doing so, we create more long-term profits than were we to act simply focused on profits today.
Do you not have to be careful that you don't become too politicized?
Well,
he's a banker by definition. He's got a charter. He's got regulators.
No, I understand that, but you're serving a large base of clients who may have very different political views or views on climate change, for instance.
We don't make a point to talk about politics, with our clients or publicly go out and say this is where we are versus that. except when it comes to fundamental values. And those values that we stand behind, respect, engagement, long-term loyalty and commitment, things of this sort, we'll speak to any day because we fundamentally believe that's what motivates people and continues to create the passion they have that differentiates you in the way you serve clients and ultimately deliver profits to shareholders.
Yeah, and Jim, when you mentioned politics, I thought you were going in a different direction, but bankers, as you know, even though you've never been one, and for those of us who are recovering
Not in a
bankers,
few years. Don't forget, I was a long time ago.
Well, that doesn't count. But for those recovering bankers, we have a lot of politics involved in terms of regulation, particularly going back to 1977 with the Community Reinvestment Act and all that. And what Milton Freidman was talking about, you're right, Keith, putting it in context was, what he was talking about is there was a push then for wage and price controls in 1970 and some other things. And so he would have been, as I was, against the government telling the banks what they need, where they need to loan money and all that sort of thing, which is not to say that you should red line and all that. You wouldn't, good banks weren't doing it anyway. But that's the context in which he was talking, isn't it?
And that's the way I interpreted it. He did come right out in his statement and say, the only social responsibility for a corporation is to generate profits. That's not the rest of his statement in total, though. Other parts of his statement were about how you use resources wisely and invest those to generate profit. And again, I believe the energy of our people, the engagement we have with strategic partners, with communities, and of course the sense of service to our clients, all is investing our resources for long-term profits.
Well, exactly right. And Ralph Waldo Emerson had a great quote about people who told about how virtuous they were. And so, Raj, I'm going to read this to you. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote. He said, "The louder he talked of honor," that was his guess, "the louder he talked of honor, the faster we counted our silverware." So we have to be careful with people who say, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you," or whatever the case may be. So talk to us a bit about the really important thing that your bank and all banks that are well run do for their customers. I mean, especially as it relates to commercial customers and how that feeds the economy. Give us some sense of that, Keith.
Thank you, Dennis. It's something to this day that I get so much enjoyment out of, is visiting with one of our clients about the business they've created to compete against giant companies and remain competitive and profitable. It's part of the core American fabric that we have corporations, small and large, that are motivated to generate a special value to their clients. And of course, our clients, is to understand how they compete and further understand their competitors and what those competitors might be doing. Not competitors that we bank, but from data that's available publicly that we can help assess as we underwrite loan requests and things of this sort, what other competitors might be doing, to be sure our clients are thinking about building the company of the future just as we are as Texas Capital. And I think that connection, that we're building a company, each of us, not just working for a big bank, is the special dynamic we have with our clients that's somewhat unusual. We're not there to just sell them a loan or a deposit. We're there to gain insight from them and learn together.
Well, and Keith, you are really an exception because you've been a CEO for a number of years, and when you look at the average lifespan of a CEO, the longevity that they hold their position, it's 4 or 5 years. And so it really comes down often when they judge and evaluate how successful they are, it's the shareholder price.
It is very important, and yet to generate the maximum shareholder price, we have believed from early on with my co-founders that you have to step through the window when it's open and exploit opportunities, even though that means investing some of the near-term profits. And that's part of this overall dynamic at Texas Capital. We aim to create massive long-term shareholder value. But yes, you have to fade some heat when you're an investing high-growth company on near-term quarterly profits at times.
So, Raj, are we seeing a change in the way compensation is granted now and evaluated?
Did you say compensation?
Yes. How compensation is determined.
I think we're starting to move towards more long-term value creation. I think the key point has been made, which is that in the long term, all of these things do go together. Employee well-being, customer satisfaction and well-being, supplier health, community health, and shareholders. Because if you don't do those things, then in the long term, ultimately, the consequences come back to impact the profitability of the business as well. So I think smart companies are starting to do that more and more. Take away those short-term incentives. If CEOs only think of their tenure as lasting a few years and they want to maximize what they get in those years, then that's going to lead to certain kinds of actions. And McKinsey and others have done research that have shown that many companies and leaders are, in fact, quite willing to do things that they know will be harmful in the long term, but they'll get a short-term payback because of the way the system had been set up. I think we're starting to move beyond that. One of the other encouraging things that is happening is there's a long-term stock exchange idea that has been floated by Eric Ries, and it just got approval by the Securities and Exchange Commission to go to the next stage. And if this comes into being, then I think it'll make a significant difference, because one of the key factors there is that shareholders' voting rights would be proportionate to not only the number of shares, but also how long they hold those shares. So if you buy shares today, you don't have any real power tomorrow to issue proxies or to steer the company in a different direction. And so activist investors, of whom in recent years we've seen many who, Whole Foods almost did get attacked and almost got destroyed by activist investors who were simply looking to make a short-term flip, but that at enormous cost to the company and what it stood for. And I think that kind of a development would disempower speculators, would empower true investors. A true investor, of course, wants a return, but they also want an impact. Right? The people who invested in Whole Foods early on actually believe that the food system and our health needs to move in a certain direction, right? So you're investing in making something happen in the world, not just, so you're looking for returns, but you're looking for impact and you're looking for legacy with investments. So,
okay, so Raj, let me stop you just for a second there and ask you to answer this really quick, because we just have 2 or 3 minutes left. Number one, do you think these big corporations will execute on what they say? And number two, will they execute, and tying into what Jim said, given the fact that the CEO's pay is almost all exclusively tied to total shareholder return or something that has to do with something for the shareholders?
Yeah, well, if they really want to implement this, they have to change that. They have to include, some companies I've seen are as much as 50% non-financial factors in compensation, right? You look at all the other stakeholders' well-being, as well as environmental, social, and governance type of things. In terms of whether these companies are going to do it, if they are smart, they will do it. The fact is, this sounds today like a nice to have thing, but it is going to be a competitive necessity. You talked earlier about millennials and younger generation looking for meaning and purpose. They want to work for companies that actually are making a difference. Investors increasingly are investing with that lens as well. Customers are buying with that lens, right? So if you don't do these things, then you are making yourself incredibly vulnerable, and other competitors that come along that are more conscious, to use our language, will dramatically gain in market share at the expense of companies that refuse to budge and hold on to a way of thinking that no longer harmonizes with the majority of Americans and majority of people everywhere.
And Dennis, it seems on this subject, just like so many, social media plays a big role, because you have to be very aware, don't you, Keith, of how you're viewed in the community, and just like that, something can change.
Absolutely. But this is all the more reason to be sure that the way you engage is broadly and deeply and with a long-term view. And then the short-term things that might occur and will occur if you're in business. They're not quite as negative, because you have advocates that are much broader than just the few that other corporations might have.
Well, and I guess you're adjusting your advertising and marketing in light of this.
We actually coined the term a few years ago we call Texas capitalism, and really it is our way of putting out there that capitalism, the way we're trying to execute it here in Texas at Texas Capital Bank,
you're getting a lot of plugs in.
Much bigger and broader than simply capitalism, the way it was perceived back in the Great Recession. It very much concerned us that capitalism became a negative word. And that's just wrong, because it's the dream of so many that come to this country to have an opportunity to create prosperity for their families.
Yeah, and Jim, the idea of social media was a good point as well, because banks like yours and smaller banks as well still have to worry about reputation risk. And unfortunately, I'm going to use Citigroup as an example. We've talked about them on this program before. They've been broke 3 to 5 times in the past 30 or 40 years. We bailed them out several times. Their reputation risk doesn't seem to affect some of these big banks. And the Citigroup was one of the 181 CEOs that signed this. And so reputation risk apparently doesn't matter because they've had all these scandals. They've paid billions of dollars in fines. But I think reputation risk and what you stand for still matters to a bank your size, doesn't it?
I think it matters. It matters a lot. Again, for us to be able to compete, Dennis, we have to be better at certain things just to be able to level the playing field a little against the giants. And this culture and sense of partnership and engagement with all our constituents is a critical differentiator.
Well, I think it is. And Jim, you fortunate to have somebody like Keith involved with the World Affairs Council as well, and a lot of others who make a difference there too.
Well, I tell you, Keith was our chairman a few years ago, and we have been friends. And I will say that his bank, as he said, they really stand behind what they said, and not just supporting the World Affairs Council, they support a number of organizations. And there's an organization called the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and each year they give out awards. And this November, the Texas Capital Bank is going to receive the award for the Outstanding Corporation.
No
Well
kidding.
Deserved.
Well,
Thank you,
Milton Freidman would roll over in his grave, but there we are. Raj, thank you so much for joining us. We're out of time. And Keith, thank you for being here. Jim, great co-hosting as always. And as for you watching this program, as you've heard, well-run businesses already practice what the Business Roundtable is just now giving lip service to. We hope that they can and will make the changes necessary to make their statements a reality. Follow us on Twitter, check McCuistionTV.com for other important topics, and thanks for tuning in as we talk about things that matter with people who care.
For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email Nikki N at NikkiMcCuistion.com. Visit our website at www.McCuistionTV.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McCuistionTV or download McCuistion TV video podcast on iTunes.